The smell of wood smoke reached me before anything else. That was the thing about the house on Cartwright Lane, it always announced itself through scent first. Cedar from the wraparound porch, the faint mineral tang of the creek that ran along the back property line, and in the evenings when the neighbors' 2 lots over lit their fire pit, wood smoke drifting across the quarter-acre like a slow conversation nobody had asked to join. I had bought the house 3 years earlier, in a February that was cold even by Portland standards, and I still remembered standing in the driveway with the keys in my hand, feeling the particular weight of something that was entirely, legally, uncomplicatedly mine. That weight was a new sensation. I had grown up in a family where things were never entirely yours. They were lent or conditional or subject to revision without notice. The keys that day had felt heavier than keys ought to, and I had stood there longer than I needed to, just holding them, letting the cold bite at my fingers, before I walked to the front door and turned the lock for the first time. Before I left for Sacramento, I had done one thing I always did before a trip of more than 2 days. I walked through the house on Cartwright Lane in a slow loop, checking the windows, the back door, the pilot light on the water heater. It was a habit I had started after a burst pipe my first winter in the house, a slow leak behind the kitchen wall that had cost me 11 days and $6,000 to repair, most of which I had not seen coming because I had not yet learned to pay attention to the sounds a house makes when something is beginning to go wrong. After that I paid attention. I walked the loop before every trip. Windows latched, water heater checked, the back door deadbolt, the spare key where it always was on the hook inside the cabinet above the refrigerator. I had never given that key to anyone. My parents had never asked for it. That is a thing I thought about later, the key I hadn't given them and the fact that they hadn't needed it. I also thought about a conversation I'd had with my father in September, 2 months before the conference. He had called on a Sunday evening, which was unusual. He was a Tuesday caller, had been since I could remember, as though he had assigned himself that slot on a calendar somewhere and kept to it for reasons he'd never explained. I had been out on the back porch with a glass of wine, watching the light go off the creek, when my phone rang. He asked how I was. I said fine. He asked about work, briefly. I gave him the brief answer. Then he said, "Has your mortgage ever come up for a refinance review?" And I said, "Not recently, why?" And he said, "Just thinking about your position. You've got a lot of equity sitting idle in that house, Presley. You should think about what you want to do with it." I had told him I was happy with my position. He had said, "Sure, but there are tools for building on that equity that you might not have considered." And I had said I'd think about it, which was the answer I gave him when I wanted to end a conversation, and he had let it go. The Sunday call was not the first time he had circled this territory. 5 months before that, a Tuesday, his usual slot, late April, he had called while I was replacing a hinge on the back gate, my phone propped against the fence post, and he had mentioned in the middle of a sentence about something else entirely that he'd been talking to an estate attorney about what he called asset consolidation. He said it the way you say something you want on the record without making it the point of the call. I had been half attending, my hands on the screwdriver, and I had said something non-committal and moved the conversation somewhere else. It wasn't until the September call that I understood the April one had been the first pass. The Sunday call was the second. But I am getting ahead of myself. I had not thought about that call between September and that Friday morning in Sacramento. I thought about it now. I thought about the way he'd said your position, the phrase of an advisor, not a father. I thought about the fact that he had called on a Sunday. I thought about the 2 months between that call and the morning I was standing at a gate window with a notary commission number in my notes app and my name on a deed I had never signed. But I am getting ahead of myself. I thought about that smell, the cedar and the creek and the occasional wood smoke. On the Tuesday morning I loaded my carry-on into the back of a rideshare and headed for PDX. The conference was in Sacramento for days, a hotel ballroom full of municipal planning consultants and county land use attorneys, the kind of professional gathering that sounds tedious from the outside and actually is tedious from the inside as well. But it was my field and I was presenting on the second afternoon, and I had been preparing the slide deck for 6 weeks. I had rehearsed it 3 times in my living room, standing in front of the blank wall between the 2 windows that looked out onto the porch, talking to the space where an audience would be. I set my phone to low-priority notifications, tucked my earbuds in, and watched Portland disappear behind a layer of low November cloud as the plane climbed south. My name is Presley Kane. I was 34 years old that November, and I had spent the previous decade doing the kind of methodical, unglamorous work that doesn't make anyone's highlight reel but quietly builds a life. I had a master's degree in urban planning from Portland State, earned while working 25 hours a week at a title company to cover the gap between my stipend and my rent. I had a job with a regional consulting firm that paid me honestly if not extravagantly. I had a 401k I contributed to every pay period without fail, a used Subaru with 80,000 miles on it that I maintained on schedule, and the house on Cartwright Lane, which I had purchased for $487,000 and which had, by the previous spring's appraisal, climbed to somewhere in the range of $610,000. Because that is what Portland does to houses if you wait long enough and keep the roof in decent repair. I had replaced the roof 2 summers ago. I had done the gutters myself on a Saturday in September, balanced on a ladder while my neighbor's dog barked at me from across the fence line. What I did not have and had not had for most of my adult life was an uncomplicated relationship with my parents. My father's name was Wade Kane. He was 61, broad across the shoulders in the way of men who were once genuinely strong and have since softened without entirely losing the architecture of it. He sold commercial insurance out of an office in Beaverton and had done so for 30 years, and he spoke about money the way some men speak about weather, constantly, and as though the topic were both urgent and somehow beyond anyone's control. He had an opinion about every financial decision I made and delivered those opinions unsolicited, in the tone of someone correcting a computational error rather than offering advice. When I bought the house on Cartwright Lane, he had walked through it once, hands in his pockets, and told me the kitchen was going to need work and the creek proximity was a flood insurance liability. He had not said congratulations. I had not expected him to. The kitchen comment had been manageable. It was the thing he said 2 weeks later that I had filed in the part of my memory reserved for things that require attention even when you don't know yet what kind. He had called on a Tuesday, of course, and said, "I hope you're thinking about what happens to that property if something happens to you. You don't have a will. You don't have an estate plan. That house becomes a problem for all of us if you're not careful." And I had said, "I'm 31, Dad." And he had said, "Presley, age is not insurance." I had told him I would look into it. I had meant it vaguely, the way you mean things you intend to do when life settles down. Life did not settle down on anyone's schedule. I had not yet drafted a will. That, as it turned out, was relevant. My mother was Loretta. She was quieter than my father in the way that water is quieter than the drain it's circling, not still, just moving in a direction that required more attention to track. She baked things and sent cards and called on the first Sunday of every month with a rotating set of conversational topics that rarely varied. Her sister's health, the neighbor's new car, whether I was eating enough, whether I was seeing anyone. She was not a cruel woman. She was a woman who had organized her life around my father's certainties for so long that she had stopped distinguishing between his conclusions and her own. They had been married for 38 years and lived in the same split level in Tigard they'd bought the year before I was born, 20 minutes from Cartwright Lane by highway and roughly 40 years from it in terms of how they understood ownership, privacy, and what a child owed a parent. I had one sister. Danny, full name Danielle, but she'd gone by Danny since she was 8 and would correct you sharply if you forgot. She was 2 years younger than me and had the particular gift of making every room feel like a negotiation she had already won before you arrived. She was charming in the way that people are charming when they have learned early that charm is more efficient currency than effort. She lived in a rental apartment in Northwest Portland, drove a car my father paid the insurance on, and had been between reliable employment and something she called freelance brand consulting for the better part of 3 years. I am not saying this to be unkind. I am saying it because it matters to what happened while I was in Sacramento, though I didn't know that yet when my plane touched down on a Tuesday afternoon, and I took a cab to the hotel and checked into a room on the 7th floor with a view of the parking structure and a heating unit that clicked every 40 minutes through the night. Danny and I had not always been at this particular distance. When we were young, before she learned that our father responded to charm, and I had already decided, with the practicality of an oldest child, to simply get things done. There had been 2 years, around the time I was 12 and she was 10, when we had been genuinely close. We had shared a bedroom until I was 13 and had talked in the dark about things that seemed enormous then and are probably not enormous now, and there had been a loyalty between us of the unreasoned kind that exists only between children who live inside the same set of conditions and have not yet developed the vocabulary to name them. Then I had started high school and she had stayed in middle school, and the gap had widened in the way gaps do when one person is moving and the other hasn't started yet. We had never recovered the distance entirely. By the time I was in graduate school and she was finishing her undergraduate degree at a college in Bend that my father had paid for without apparent concern about her major or her trajectory, we were in the habit of each other, fond, careful, neither of us saying the things that might require the other to respond honestly. I did not know, in any specific sense, what Danny wanted out of her life. I suspected she didn't know either, and I suspected our father had something to do with that, and I had decided a long time ago that this was not my problem to solve. The conference was everything I'd expected. I ate mediocre catered food and shook hands and listened to a panel on adaptive reuse zoning that had 2 genuinely interesting data points buried inside 45 minutes of self-congratulation. I sat through a morning session on stormwater infrastructure financing that was more useful, took notes in the margins of the printed program, and had a lunch conversation with a city planner from Eugene working on a riparian buffer ordinance that overlapped with some of my firm's recent work. My presentation on the second afternoon went well enough, good questions from the back row, a follow-up conversation afterward with a woman from a Tacoma firm that might or might not become something professionally useful. She gave me her card. I gave her mine. We said we'd follow up in January, the way people say things at conferences. She wrote a time on the back of my card, 2:45 Thursday, to mark when we'd talked, a detail that would matter later in a way neither of us could have anticipated. Wednesday evening I had drinks with 2 colleagues from a Portland firm I occasionally collaborated with, and we stayed at the hotel bar longer than we'd intended, talking about a zoning variance case that had been making the rounds of the regional planning community and had implications for the kind of work all 3 of us did. I drank 2 glasses of wine and switched to water and was in my room by 10:30. I had a good night's sleep, which I noted with satisfaction because I didn't always sleep well in hotels, and on Thursday morning I had a session I was genuinely looking forward to, a presentation on climate-adaptive land use strategies from a research team at UC Davis that had been doing work I'd been following in the literature for 2 years. I sat in the second row and took 4 pages of notes and thought about nothing in particular except the work, which was a thing I had been doing for long enough that I no longer had to remind myself to do it. The work made its own gravity. I moved inside it without effort. Thursday afternoon I had the follow-up conversation with the woman from the Tacoma firm, at a coffee setup in the conference hallway, standing beside a tall table with paper cups and a hotel urn that had been there since morning. We talked for 40 minutes. I was in a session on housing density incentives by 3:15, and in the conference dinner by 6:30, sitting between a county assessor from Medford and a transportation planner who had interesting things to say about freight corridor management and said almost none of them because the man across the table kept interrupting. I ate the salmon, which was better than the chicken at Tuesday's dinner. I was back in my room by 9 and in bed by 10, and I set my alarm for 6 because I had an 8 o'clock checkout and wanted to be at PDX early enough that the gate wouldn't feel rushed. I checked my phone infrequently. There were texts from my mother, the kind she sent in clusters, short and unrelated to one another, asking if I'd eaten, noting that Danny had stopped by the house in Tigard for dinner Tuesday, mentioning that she'd seen a news story about flooding somewhere in the Columbia Gorge and hoped I wasn't affected. Normal Loretta static. I responded with brief, reassuring replies and went back to the conference. On Thursday, between the morning session and lunch, a text from my father, "Hope the conference is going well. You still planning to come for Thanksgiving? Your mother would like to know about food." I had replied yes. Probably Wednesday evening. And he had sent back, "Good. We should catch up." He had not said about what and I had not asked, and I had put the phone in my bag and walked into the lunchroom and filled a plate. Thursday evening I had dinner alone at a Thai place 2 blocks from the hotel, a bowl of curry and a glass of water and a paperback I'd been carrying since October and managed to advance by 40 pages over the course of the trip. I went to bed at 9:30. I had an 8 a.m. checkout Friday and wanted to be sharp for the flight home. My phone buzzed at 6:47 Friday morning. I was already awake, had been since 6, standing at the narrow hotel window with a cup of weak room service coffee, watching the Sacramento sky do the thing it does in November, going from flat gray to a pale, washed-out orange along the eastern edge, the light arriving without drama, like an accountant clocking in. The buzz was my mother. I glanced at the preview on the lock screen, saw the first line, "Just wanted you to know that we took care of something at the house," and felt a small, cold thing move through the center of my chest. Not panic. Something quieter and more deliberate than panic. The physical sensation of a door closing in a room you didn't know had a door. I set the coffee down on the windowsill. I unlocked the phone. The full message read, "Presley just wanted you to know that we took care of something at the house while you were gone. Dad says it was the right thing and we can explain when you're back. Don't worry about it. Safe flight." I read it twice. Then a third time, parsing each phrase the way you parse language when you already know something is wrong but your brain is still running a few steps behind your instincts. Took care of something at the house. My house. My house on Cartwright Lane where I was not present, where I had not asked anyone to take care of anything. Dad says it was the right thing. Not we thought or we hoped, Dad says. The passive voice of a decision already executed and now being reported. I didn't call her back immediately. I finished the coffee at the window. I packed my bag with the deliberateness of someone using physical tasks to keep their thoughts ordered, rolling each item rather than folding it, fitting everything into the carry-on with no wasted space. I checked out at 7:55 and sat in the back of a rideshare with my phone face down on my knee for the first 8 minutes of the drive before I turned it over and called my father. He answered on the second ring. "Presley." His voice was the way it always was when he had done something he considered practical and was bracing for a response he considered irrational. A certain flatness professionally cultivated over 30 years of explaining to people why their claims weren't covered. "What did you do at my house?" I asked. A pause, 2 or 3 seconds, deliberate. I had learned to read my father's pauses the way you learn to read weather. This one meant he was deciding not which version of the truth to offer but which framing to lead with. "We made a practical decision," he said. "You've been sitting on that property for 3 years, Presley. You're not renting the extra room. You're not leveraging the equity. You don't have an estate plan, you don't have a will. What did you do at my house?" I said again. Another pause. Shorter. "We had the deed transferred," he said. "It's in the family trust now. It protects everyone." The rideshare merged onto the highway. Sacramento's edge was giving way to the long flat valley, and the early light was hitting the dry grass in long gold angles. My hand had tightened around the phone. I eased the grip without setting it down. "You transferred the deed," I said. My voice stayed level. I was paying attention to keeping it level. "Into the Kane Family Trust," he said. "Which covers your mother and me and you and Danny equally. It's not a loss to you, it's a restructure. I've been talking to an estate attorney for 2 months and this is the correct move for a family in our asset position. I didn't authorize a transfer." "You didn't need to. The trust instrument." "I didn't authorize a transfer," I said again, each word placed carefully. "Of a property in my name. That I purchased. That I have a mortgage on. What you're describing is someone signing my name on a county document without my knowledge or consent." The silence that followed was longer and had a different quality, not retreat but recalculation. "Nobody signed your name," he said, his voice dropping into something harder and quieter. "Danny has power of attorney." I let that land. I counted the pause instead of answering it. The rideshare driver had the radio on low, a country station, something with a fiddle, and I held onto the sound for a moment while I processed what my father had just said. Danny had power of attorney. Danny, who I had never appointed to anything, who had no legal authority over any aspect of my financial affairs, who I had certainly never authorized to execute a deed transfer on a $610,000 property while I was 400 miles away. "Danny doesn't have power of attorney over me," I said. "I have never executed a POA document. Not for Danny. Not for you. Not for anyone." "Your mother has the paperwork," he said, and there it was, the settled quality, the tone of a man who believes the action is done and the conversation is a formality. It was handled correctly. "I'm not going through the legal mechanics on a phone call. Come home, we'll sit down, I'll show you everything." "I'm not coming to your house," I said. A beat. "Then we'll come to yours," he said. "You will not come to mine," I said. "Not until I understand exactly what was done and on what authority." He exhaled, measured, the performance of patience. "This is an asset protection move. Standard estate planning. If something happened to you, that property would go through probate. It would go through probate to whatever beneficiaries I designate," I said. "In documents I sign. Not decisions made for me while I'm out of state. You're 34 years old and you still act like the family has no stake." I'm going to call the county recorder's office when it opens, I said. That stopped him. The silence changed texture, tighter, more careful. There's no need to do that, he said. I think there is, I said. Presley. His voice rose slightly, not a shout but the warning register, the one I had known since childhood. I want you to think carefully before you turn a family decision into a legal matter. We did this to protect you. You transferred my home without my knowledge, I said. Using a power of attorney I never granted. I want to understand what was filed and when and by whom. By making a decision that benefits everyone in this family. Including Danny, I said. The silence this time had weight to it. Dense. Danny is family, he said. Danny is family who doesn't own property, I said. Danny is family who hasn't held a salaried position in 3 years. Danny is family who now apparently has legal authority over an asset she didn't purchase and can't carry the mortgage on. That's not what this is, he snapped. I didn't answer the snap. I let it sit in the air between us and did not pick it up. I'll call you when I'm back in Portland, I said. Presley, don't. Safe drive, Dad. I ended the call. My hands were resting on my knees and they were not shaking. I noticed that specifically. The damp at the center of each palm I pressed against the fabric of my slacks and let dry. Outside, the valley was scrolling past, flat and bleached, and the fiddle from the radio was still going faintly somewhere behind the headrest, and I sat with everything I had just heard and I did the thing I always did when the foundation shifted. I went practical. Power of attorney I had never signed. A deed transfer on a Multnomah County property recorded while I was in another state. A family trust one had never agreed to enter. A $610,000 house my father had just told me with complete composure was now structured differently than it had been on Monday. I searched Multnomah County Assessor and Recorder office hours. Opened at 8. My flight landed at 10:40. The recorder's office was 11 minutes from PDX. I was at the Sacramento gate by 8:10 and made the call standing at the window looking out onto the tarmac, watching a ground crew work the belly of a plane 3 gates down. The woman who answered had the crisp, frictionless manner of someone who processes high-volume requests carefully but without sentiment. I gave her my name, the property address on Cartwright Lane, and asked whether any transfer documents had been recorded against it in the past 7 days. She put me on hold. The hold music was a single piano phrase that looped every 40 seconds. She came back. Yes, she said. We have a recorded instrument on that property. Recorded Thursday. A deed of transfer to the Kane Family Revocable Living Trust. The muscles in my jaw set. My voice stayed even. Can you give me the notary information on that instrument? I asked. She read me a name and a commission number. I typed both into the notes app on my phone. And the grantor named on the deed, I said. What name is listed? A brief pause. Presley A. Kane, she said. I looked out at the ground crew. One of them was signaling to another with a raised arm, pointing at something under the wing. Thank you, I said. Can you walk me through the process for obtaining a certified copy of that document in person today? She did. I wrote it down. I thanked her and ended the call and stood at the window without moving, the phone warm in my hand. My name. On a deed I had never seen. Notarized on a Thursday when I was in a Sacramento conference room listening to a panel on infill development. The house on Cartwright Lane, the cedar smell and the creak and the particular weight of those keys on a cold February morning, was now, according to Multnomah County records, the property of the Kane Family Revocable Living Trust. I sat down in one of the gate chairs. A family 2 rows over had a toddler stretched across both their laps, asleep, one small sneaker hanging off the edge of the seat. The gate agent was working at the podium with her head down. A man to my left was on a work call, voice low and controlled, the cadence of someone managing a problem remotely. I understood that cadence now in a way I hadn't 4 days ago. I opened the Notes app and started a list. Not a list of grievances, a practical one. The notary name and commission number. The recorder's office address and hours. The instrument number and filing date. The question of what documentation Danny had presented to execute a transfer in my name, and whether the notary had witnessed my signature in person or had notarized a document bearing my name without my presence, which was a specific category of problem with a specific legal name I was already turning over carefully in the back of my mind. My phone buzzed. Text from my mother. Dad said you seemed upset. Just remember we did this because we love you and want the family protected. You were never going to do anything with that equity anyway, you're so ungrateful sometimes, Presley. We gave up a lot for you. I read it once. I put the phone face down on the seat beside me. The gate agent announced pre-boarding for passengers requiring extra assistance. I picked the phone back up, went back to the Notes app and added one more line, Recorder's Office, certified copy, in person, today. Then I put the phone in my jacket pocket and looked back out at the tarmac. The ground crew had finished and were moving to the next task, efficient and unhurried, each person clear on what came next. That was the only thing in that moment that I envied anyone. The flight home took 2 hours and 20 minutes. I spent the first 40 of them with my Notes app open, adding to the list, working through the mechanics of what my father had described with the same methodical attention I applied to any structural problem. A power of attorney is not a document that appears on its own. Someone drafts it. Someone signs it. Someone has it notarized. For it to be valid for real property in Oregon, it has to meet specific statutory requirements. It has to be signed by the principal, me, in the presence of a notary, or in some circumstances before 2 adult witnesses who are not the agent being appointed. There is no version of a valid Oregon POA for real property that does not require my signature or my presence in some form. My father had said, with the composure of a man who had rehearsed the line, that Danny had power of attorney. My mother had the paperwork. It was handled correctly. I had worked at a title company for 2 years during graduate school. I had processed enough real property transfer documents in that time to know what correctly looked like. And I knew with a certainty that sat in my sternum like a stone that whatever paperwork my mother was holding was not correctly executed, because I had never sat across from a notary, I had never signed my name on a POA document, and I had never, in any context, authorized my sister to act on my behalf in any matter, let alone a real property transfer. I spent the last 40 minutes of the flight with my eyes closed and my hands flat on my thighs and the list running anyway behind my eyelids, turning over everything I didn't yet know. Who the estate attorney was. Who the notary was. Whether the same notary had appeared on both the POA and the transfer deed, and if so, what that meant about the relationship between the notary and my father. Whether my lender had been notified. The due on sale clause. I had read my mortgage documents carefully when I signed them, the way I read all documents carefully, and I knew there was a clause that allowed the lender to call the full balance immediately if the property transferred without approval. $361,400 due immediately. My father had described this as a restructure that protected everyone. I thought about the ways it might protect everyone except me, and I thought about them very specifically, without the blurring that comes from emotion, the way you think about problems in the hour before you land. The plane landed at 10:42. I was off the jetway by 10:53, through the terminal in 8 minutes, in the back of a rideshare by 11:05. I gave the driver the address of the Multnomah County Recorder's Office on S.E. Hawthorne rather than my home address, and I sat watching the familiar gray-green of the Portland landscape come back around me, the Douglas firs along the highway corridor, the overpass graffiti, the flat November sky pressing low over everything, and I did not feel the relief I usually felt coming home. My phone rang at 11:18. Danny. I let it ring. It rang again at 11:26. I watched it ring. I did not pick it up. At 11:31 she sent a text, "Press, can you please call me back? I know you talked to Dad. I want to explain." I put the phone in my bag. The recorder's office was a government building with the particular interior quality of all government buildings, fluorescent lighting, linoleum in a pattern that had been practical in 1987 and had never been updated, a numbered ticketing system and a row of chairs along one wall. I took a number. I sat down. There were 3 people ahead of me, and the woman at the second window was dealing with something complicated involving a plat map that required her supervisor, and the wait was 22 minutes by the clock on the wall above the exit sign. I did not mind the wait. I took out my phone and used the time carefully. First, I pulled up the Oregon Secretary of State's Notary Public Database and searched for the name I had typed into my Notes app at the Sacramento gate. The search returned one result: active commission, business address listed as a suite in a Beaverton office building. I noted the suite number. I noted the zip code. I did not yet know my father's office zip code precisely, but I knew his office was in Beaverton, and I set a reminder to verify the address comparison once I had the certified copy in hand. Then I opened a new note and wrote down in complete sentences every fact I had confirmed and every question that remained open. The confirmed facts took half a page. The open questions took 2.5. I wrote them without editorializing, what I knew, what I didn't know, what I needed to find out, and in what order. The list had the quality of a structural drawing, not the thing itself but the precise measurement of what the thing required. When my number was called, I went to the window and gave my name and the property address and requested a certified copy of the deed of transfer recorded on Thursday. The clerk, a man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, pulled up the record, confirmed the instrument number, printed the document, stamped and certified it, and slid it under the partition with a form for me to sign and a fee of $22. I paid the fee. I picked up the document. I carried it to the row of chairs along the wall and I sat down and I read it. It was 2 pages. The first page was the transfer language, the grantor, the grantee, the legal description of the property, the consideration listed as $10 and other valuable consideration, which was standard language meaning no money had actually changed hands. The grantee was the Kane Family Revocable Living Trust, dated September of this year. September. 2 months ago. The same month my father had called on a Sunday to ask about my equity position. The grantor line read, Presley A. Kane, an unmarried person. The signature at the bottom of the first page was my name. The letters were close enough that if you were processing a high volume of documents and had no reason to look carefully, you might not stop. But I knew my own signature. I had signed my name on the purchase documents for this property 3 years ago, sitting across a table from an escrow officer and a title company rep, signing 8 separate documents in 45 minutes until the muscles in my hand ached. I knew exactly how my signature sat on a line, the slight leftward lean of the capital P, the way the Y dropped below and curled back. This signature had the lean right. The Y was different. I held the document at a slight angle under the fluorescent light and looked at the signature for a long time. Not because I needed to look longer to know, I knew immediately the way you know your own face, but because I wanted to be certain that what I was registering was exactly what I thought it was, and not the distortion that can come from shock. I looked at it the way I had looked at the property survey when I was buying the house, the way I looked at any document I was being asked to treat as definitive, carefully, without hurrying, without deciding in advance what I was going to see. The signature was not mine. The notary acknowledgement on page 2 bore a stamp and a signature, R. Vance Pruitt, Notary Public, State of Oregon. Commission expiring March of next year. The acknowledgement stated that on the date in question, a Thursday 4 days ago, the second day of my conference, Presley A. Kane had personally appeared before R. Vance Pruitt and acknowledged signing the instrument as a free and voluntary act. I had been in Sacramento on that Thursday. I had a hotel receipt, a conference badge with a Thursday date stamp, the business card the woman from the Tacoma firm had handed me that afternoon with a time written on the back where we'd agreed to reconnect, and the boarding pass on my phone showing a Friday morning flight home. I sat in the chair in the county recorder's office and I read the notary acknowledgement a second time, and then I folded the document carefully along its existing crease and placed it in the outer pocket of my carry-on where I would not have to reach past anything to get to it. Then I took out my phone and I called my sister back. She answered before the second ring, which meant she had been waiting. Presley. I have the certified copy, I said. A pause. Shorter than my father's pauses and with a different quality, not the pause of a man recalibrating his position, but the pause of someone who had prepared a speech and was now unsure which version to use. Okay, she said. I can explain. I want to hear it, I said. In person. Tonight. Another pause. I can come to you, she said. Or Mom and Dad's might be easier if we're all. Not Mom and Dad's, I said. Come to Cartwright Lane. 6 o'clock. She said she would. I ended the call, went back to the rideshare app and put in my home address. The house on Cartwright Lane was exactly as I had left it. I stood in the entryway for a moment after unlocking the door, taking inventory the way I always did when I returned from a trip. The air a little stale, the thermostat having dropped to its programmed-away temperature, the particular quiet of a house that has been unoccupied for 4 days. Nothing disturbed. Nothing moved. The spare key was still on its hook inside the cabinet above the refrigerator. I checked, though I wasn't sure what I expected to find. I set my carry-on in the bedroom, changed out of my travel clothes and made coffee. While the coffee brewed, I went to the filing cabinet in the second bedroom, which I used as a home office. The cabinet was a 2-drawer, gray metal, the kind sold at every office supply store for $140, and it held the documents that mattered: tax returns going back 7 years, the purchase file for the house, the mortgage statements, the homeowner's insurance policy, the maintenance records. I had kept those records the way I kept everything, methodically in labeled folders in chronological order within each folder. I reached into the top drawer and pulled out the folder labeled Purchase, Cartwright Lane. I took it to the desk and opened it. The original purchase documents were there in full: the purchase and sale agreement, the title commitment, the closing disclosure, the deed of trust, the warranty deed, the escrow instructions, and at the very back, the HUD settlement statement showing the full accounting of the transaction. I had paid $487,000 for the house. I had put down $97,400, 20%, scraped together over 4 years of deliberate saving, a tax refund I had resisted spending, and the proceeds from selling a car I had inherited from my grandmother when she passed, a 2009 Honda that had been worth exactly $6,800 at the time and had felt, when I deposited the check, like a last small gift from the one person in my family who had consistently behaved as though my life was worth investing in. My grandmother's name was Magnolia. She had lived in a 1-story house in Tigard 2 miles from my parents and had died 4 years ago at 81, clear-minded until the last 3 months. She had taught school for 31 years and had bought her house in 1974 for $31,000 and had paid it off in full by 1989 and had refused, for 30 years after that, to take out a line of credit against it regardless of how many times my father suggested she leverage the equity. She had instead saved quietly in index funds and had left her estate divided between my father and me, with a note in the will that read, "For Presley, because she does the work and doesn't ask to be thanked for it." My father had contested the note. Not legally, he hadn't had grounds, but verbally at length, at the kitchen table in Tigard 3 days after the will was read, while my mother made tea she didn't drink and Danny sat in the corner looking at her phone. He had said it was unnecessary and divisive and that Magnolia had not understood the full picture of what the family needed. He had said that a more equitable distribution would have been to put everything into the family and let decisions be made together. He had said this while I sat across the table and listened to him describe my grandmother's considered, clearly documented final wishes as a problem of insufficient understanding. I had not argued with him at the table. I had driven home and deposited the check the following morning. That had been 4 years ago. The $6,800 had gone into the house fund, and the house fund had gone into the down payment, and the down payment had gone into 36 mortgage payments beginning on the 1st of March, 2 years later, which I had made without missing one. The mortgage statement in the folder confirmed the current balance, $361,400 remaining. The property was worth $610,000. The equity, my equity, built from my salary and my savings and my grandmother's Honda and 4 years of making choices my father considered insufficiently ambitious, was approximately $248,600. I put the folder back in the drawer. I pulled out a second folder labeled Mortgage, Current Year. I went through the statements, 12 months of payments, all current, all in my name, all addressed to the property on Cartwright Lane. Then I found what I was looking for near the back, the annual escrow analysis statement, which listed the property tax amounts held in escrow and the insurance premium. The property was insured under my name only. No other named insured. No additional interest holder. No trust listed as a loss payee. Which meant that when Danny had signed my name to a transfer deed and had it filed with the county, she had transferred title to a property that still carried a mortgage, without notifying the lender. Most mortgage instruments include a due-on-sale clause. If the property transfers ownership without lender approval, the lender has the right to call the full balance due immediately. $361,400 due immediately. I wrote that down. I was still at the desk when my phone rang at 4:15. My father. I picked up. "I know you went to the recorder's office," he said. No greeting. The flatness was back, but under it now was something running at a different frequency, not anger exactly, but the register of a man who has decided the conversation has entered a phase requiring different management. "I did," I said. "Presley, I want you to listen to me carefully." His voice was deliberate, each word placed with the care of someone who knows they are speaking for a record even if no record is being kept. What was done with proper legal authority and with your best interests as the stated purpose. The trust is revocable. You can be named as a co-trustee. The structure protects everyone in the event of incapacity or... The deed was signed with my name on a day I was in Sacramento, I said. I have the hotel receipt, the conference documentation, and a boarding pass showing I flew home Friday morning. I was not in Portland on Thursday. I did not appear before a notary. I did not sign that document. A silence. Danny had authority, he said. Danny had a document she claims is a power of attorney, I said. I'd like to see it. You'll see it when we sit down as a family. I'd like to see it before 6 o'clock tonight, I said. Danny is coming here at 6. If she brings the POA document with her, we can look at it together. Another silence. Longer. This doesn't need to become what you're making it, he said. I'm not making it anything, I said. I'm asking to see a document that was used to transfer my home. That's a reasonable request. You're approaching this like an adversary. I'm approaching this like a homeowner, I said. He exhaled, that same measured breath from the rideshare call, the performance of patience, but compressed now, the air coming out faster than he intended. I'll tell Danny to bring it, he said. Thank you, I said. Presley. He paused. Whatever you're thinking about doing, I want you to consider what it would cost this family. Not financially. I mean what it would cost. The relationships. Your mother. She's not well, Presley, you know that, and something like this becoming a... I'll see Danny at 6, I said. Good night, Dad. I ended the call. I set the phone on the desk. I did not fill the silence that came after. My mother's health. He had mentioned it the way he deployed most significant information, tucked inside a reasonable-sounding sentence, positioned so that responding directly would require me to either confirm his framing or appear not to care. I did care. I also recognized the move. I went to the kitchen and stood at the back window looking out at the creek. The light was going by 4:30 at this time of year, and the water was already in shadow, moving the way it always moved, steady, without drama, indifferent to the November cold and to whatever was happening in the house above it. At 5:58 my doorbell rang. Danny was standing on the porch in a long camel-colored wool coat that had been a birthday gift from our parents 2 years ago, looking the way she always looked when she had been rehearsing something and was trying not to show it. Her chin was slightly raised. Her eyes moved past me into the interior as I opened the door. Come in, I said. She came in. She didn't take the coat off. That was information. Do you want coffee? I asked. No, she said. Thank you. I gestured toward the living room. She sat on the near end of the sofa, close to the arm, her bag in her lap. I sat in the chair across from her, the coffee table between us. Dad said to bring this, she said, and reached into her bag and pulled out a document in a clear plastic sleeve. She held it across the table. I reached forward and took it. I held it without opening it and looked at Danny for a moment, at the way her jaw was set and her hands had gone still in her lap, too still, the stillness of someone applying deliberate effort not to do something with their hands. Before I read this, I said, I want to ask you something. She waited. Did you know what you were signing when you signed the transfer deed? Her chin came up a fraction. I had authority. That's not what I asked, I said. Did you know that I didn't know? That I hadn't consented? When you signed my name on that document and handed it to a notary and had it filed with the county, did you know I hadn't agreed to any of it? The silence between us was different from the silences with my father. With my father, silence was tactical. With Danny, this one had a different quality, the quality of a person who has arrived at a door they expected to find open and has found it shut. Dad said it was a family decision, she said. Her voice was steady but the effort was audible. He said you'd been consulted. I looked at her. She looked back. Something moved across her face, not guilt, not yet, but the edge of understanding that she had been positioned somewhere she hadn't fully mapped before agreeing to stand there. I was in Sacramento, I said. I was not consulted. I turned the clear plastic sleeve over in my hands. Then I opened it, slid the document out, 2 pages, folded once and unfolded it slowly. It was not what I expected. Not because it was something I hadn't seen before, but because of the date at the top of the first page. The power of attorney bore a date from 14 months ago. 14 months ago. I read the date twice. Then I set the document on the coffee table between us, smoothed it flat with one hand, and looked at it the way you look at something when you need your eyes to confirm what your brain has already processed. 14 months ago I had been living in this house. I had been working at my firm, making my mortgage payments, going about my life. 14 months ago I had not spoken to my father about estate planning. I had not, in any context, sat down with an attorney or a notary to execute a power of attorney document giving my sister authority over my real property. "Danny," I said, "where did this come from?" She had been watching me read. Her fingers had come back to life, working at the strap of her bag. "Dad's attorney prepared it," she said. "Dad said you'd agreed to it as part of a larger estate conversation. He said you'd both talked about it and you were going to sign a whole package of documents and this was part of it." "I never had that conversation with Dad," I said. "A beat. He said." "I know what he said," I said. "I'm telling you what's true. I never agreed to a package of estate documents. I never agreed to give you power of attorney. I never signed this." She looked at the document on the table. Then back at me. Something shifted in her expression. She dressed for a conversation that wasn't happening, and the coat she hadn't taken off suddenly seemed to register as the wrong thing to be wearing. "Presley," she said, dropping into something less rehearsed. "I thought it was legitimate. Dad showed me the document and said you'd signed it already and he just needed me to use it for the trust filing." "You didn't think to call me and confirm," I said. My voice stayed quiet. She opened her mouth. She closed it. "Before signing my name to a county document on a $610,000 property," I said. "You didn't think to pick up the phone." The fingers on her bag strap stopped moving. "He said it would upset you," she said. "He said if we ran it by you first he said you'd make it complicated." I let that sit between us. He had said I would make it complicated. He had told my sister that the reason to proceed without consulting me, on a transfer of my own home, was that I would raise objections. Which was not a justification. It was a confession, stated plainly without anyone recognizing it as one. "There's a problem with this document beyond the date," I said. Danny said nothing. I turned to the second page and pointed to the notary acknowledgement at the bottom. "This notarization. It states that I appeared before the notary in person on this date, 14 months ago, and acknowledged my signature. Do you see the notary's name?" She leaned forward. "Read it." "R. Vance Pruitt," she said. "R. Vance Pruitt also notarized the transfer deed," I said. "The one you signed on Thursday. Same notary on the POA I allegedly signed 14 months ago and on the transfer deed executed 4 days ago while I was in Sacramento." She sat back. I watched her work through the geometry of this. She was not a stupid woman, and I could see the moment when the pieces arranged themselves into a shape she had not expected to see. "Oh," she said quietly. "Yeah," I said. She sat with that. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the creak through the back wall, low, steady, continuous. "Presley, I didn't know," she said. "I swear I didn't know any of this was. I thought it was a normal family estate thing." "I understand that," I said. And I did, partially. I understood that Danny had been positioned by our father as the mechanism of this without enough information to understand what she was participating in. That was consistent with how he operated. It was also consistent with something else, something I was less willing to say out loud yet, which was that Danny had not asked the questions she should have asked, because asking them would have required her to consider the possibility that our father was not acting in good faith. "I need to keep this document," I said, and picked up the POA from the table. "It's the only copy Dad gave me," she said. "I know," I said. She looked at the document in my hand. Then at me. The rehearsed quality was entirely gone now, and what was underneath it was less certain and more genuine. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Tonight?" I said. "I'm going to make some calls." "And after that?" "I'll let you know," I said. She stood, pulled the coat tighter around herself, a reflex the room wasn't cold, picked up her bag and moved toward the door. I followed her. On the porch she stopped and turned back. The November air came in through the open doorway, carrying the creek smell and the faint edge of someone's fire pit 2 lots over. "Dad's going to ask me how it went," she said. "Tell him we talked," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Nodded once. Went down the porch steps toward her car. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. I let the silence settle around the house and the porch and the cedar smell and the early dark. Then I went inside, back to the desk, and laid both documents side by side under the lamp, the certified copy of the transfer deed and the power of attorney Danny had brought. I reached into the top drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Across the top I wrote a single question: who is R. Vance Pruitt? Below it a second: and who is paying him? My phone lit up on the desk. A text from my father. Danny said the conversation went well. Glad you two had a chance to talk. I think when you've had a night to sit with it you'll see this was the right call. We can discuss co-trustee options next week. Get some rest. I read it once. I set the phone face down. Then I opened my laptop, went to the Oregon Notary Public Database, and typed in the name R. Vance Pruitt. The search returned one result. Active commission. Business address listed as a suite in a Beaverton office building. The same zip code as my father's insurance office. The suite number was 440. I wrote it down below the zip code, and then I sat for a long time looking at what I had written. Beaverton is not a large city. Its commercial office inventory is not enormous. Two businesses sharing a zip code is not, by itself, evidence of anything. I knew that. I also knew that a notary whose business address sits in the same postal zone as the insurance office of the man who orchestrated a fraudulent property transfer is a fact that belongs on a list, and I put it on the list, and I underlined it once. After that I did something I had been putting off since the Sacramento airport. I called my lender. The mortgage servicer's after-hours line connected me to an automated system that could not help with what I needed, so I noted the direct line for the loan servicing department and set a reminder to call at 8 the following morning. Then I took a photograph of both documents, the certified transfer deed and the power of attorney, and emailed them to myself with a subject line that read, "Originals, do not delete." I put both physical documents back in the clear plastic sleeve, carried them to the filing cabinet, and placed them in a new folder I labeled with that morning's date. I did not sleep well. I was aware of that as a fact without feeling particularly troubled by it. I lay in the dark and listened to the creak and thought about the September phone call, about the Kane Family Revocable Living Trust dated September of this year, about the 2 months between that Sunday evening call and the Thursday my name appeared on a county document in Sacramento. I thought about the April call too, the offhand mention of asset consolidation, the half-heard conversation I'd let pass because my hands had been on a screwdriver and I hadn't wanted to give it weight. I understood now that the April call had been the first pass and the September call had been the second. That there had been at least 2 months of visible preparation and, in all probability, months of planning before that. 2 months was enough time to draft a trust instrument, retain an attorney, prepare a power of attorney, and arrange for a compliant notary to execute documentation bearing a signature that was not mine. 2 months was a deliberate timeline, not a spontaneous one. At 7:15 I was at the desk with coffee, and by 8:02 I had the lender's loan servicing department on the line. The representative who answered was named Marcus. I gave him my loan number, verified my identity, and told him I was calling because I had reason to believe an unauthorized deed transfer had been recorded against the property securing my mortgage without lender notification or approval. There was a pause on his end that had a different quality from my father's pauses. This was the pause of someone pulling up a screen and reading something they had not expected to read. "Ms. Kane," he said carefully, "I'm showing that the property address associated with this loan had a deed recorded last Thursday." "I know," I said. "I didn't authorize it." Another pause. "I want to flag something for you," he said, and his voice had taken on the particular gentleness of someone delivering information to a person who is about to have a difficult day. When a deed transfers title to a property securing one of our loans without prior approval, that can trigger the due-on sale provision under the deed of trust. I'm going to need to escalate this to our default prevention team and to our legal department. "I understand," I said. "I want to note for your records that I did not execute this transfer. I was not present in the state when it was executed, and I have documentation establishing that. Hotel receipts, a conference itinerary, a boarding pass. I also have what purports to be a power of attorney used to execute the transfer, which I believe to be fraudulently prepared. I'll be filing a complaint with the Oregon Department of Justice and with the county. I wanted your institution to have that context before any default procedures are initiated." Marcus asked me to hold. I held for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and when he came back he said that a notation had been added to my loan file, that the default prevention team would be in contact within 2 business days, and that in the interim no acceleration action would be taken. He gave me a case number. I wrote it down. "One more question," I said. "Has anyone contacted this institution in the past several months regarding this loan? Any third party inquiring about the balance, the payment history, or the escrow account?" A pause as he checked. "I'm not able to share details of any third-party inquiries," he said. "But I can note that you've asked the question and it will be included in the file." "Thank you," I said. I ended the call and added the case number to the legal pad. My phone lit up at 9:40. My father. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:44 a text, "Presley, call me when you have a chance. No urgency. No urgency." I read that twice and then set the phone face down. At 10:20 another text from my mother, "Hi honey, just checking in. Dad mentioned you two talked yesterday and things went well. Let me know if you want to come for dinner this week. I'm making the chicken thing you like." I did not respond. At 11:08 my father called again. I let it go to voicemail again. The voicemail notification sat on my screen for 40 minutes before I listened to it. His voice in the recording was the one he used for messages, a degree warmer than his phone voice, more deliberate, the voice of a man who knows a message is a record. "Presley, it's Dad. I just wanted to reach out and say that I know yesterday was a lot, and I understand if you needed some time. I want you to know that everything that was done out of love for this family, and with your protection in mind. The trust structure is sound. I had it reviewed by a qualified attorney. I'd like to sit down and go through it with you properly, the full documents, everything, so you can see what was built here and why it makes sense. I think once you understand the full picture you'll feel differently. Call me when you're ready. Love you." I played it a second time, listening not for the content but for the structure of it. Everything that was done out of love for this family. I noted the phrasing on the legal pad. I was still at the desk at noon when my doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. I went to the front window and looked out before opening the door. My father's car was in the driveway. A dark green Buick he had owned for 6 years and maintained with the same compulsive regularity he applied to everything he controlled. He was standing on my porch in a jacket and slacks, his hands in his pockets, his posture the posture of a man paying a reasonable visit. Behind him, still on the front walk, was my mother. Loretta was wearing her good coat, the gray one she saved for occasions she considered significant, and she was holding her purse in both hands in front of her, the way she held it at church. She looked smaller than she had the last time I'd seen her, 2 months ago at a dinner in Tigard that I had attended and my father had used to make 3 separate observations about my house's underperforming equity. She also looked, standing on my front walk in the November cold, like a woman who had been brought somewhere rather than a woman who had chosen to come. I opened the door. "Presley." My father's voice was the warm version, the voicemail version. "We were in the neighborhood. Your mother wanted to see the house." I looked past him at my mother. She gave me a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Come in," I said. They came in. My father moved through the entryway with the ease of a man entering a space he considers familiar. My mother stepped in more carefully, looking at the living room the way people look at rooms when they are performing looking rather than actually looking. "Coffee?" I said. "That'd be great," my father said. I went to the kitchen and made 2 cups and carried them out and sat in the remaining chair across the coffee table. My father picked up his coffee and looked at me over the rim of the mug with the expression of a man who has decided that warmth is the correct strategy and has committed to it fully. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. "Clear," I said. He nodded slowly. "Good. That's good. I think a little distance from yesterday helps." He set the mug down. "I want to talk through the trust structure with you properly, now that you've had time to." "I called the lender this morning," I said. A pause. Not the recalibrating pause, something tighter. "What do you mean you called the lender?" he said. "I called the mortgage servicer," I said. "I notified them that an unauthorized deed transfer had been recorded against the property securing the loan without lender approval. They've opened a case." The warmth in his expression didn't disappear, it rearranged. The way a face rearranges when the muscles beneath it receive a different instruction. "That was unnecessary," he said. "The due-on-sale clause in my deed of trust would disagree," I said. "Presley." He leaned forward slightly. What you've done is take a family matter and introduce a third party into it before giving us a chance to. You transferred my home, I said. You introduced every third party that's now involved. He sat back. My mother, on the sofa, had stopped performing, looking at the room. She was looking at her coffee cup. I want to show you the trust document, he said. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded sheaf of papers. He placed them on the coffee table and smoothed them flat with his palm. Read it. The whole thing. You'll see that your interest is fully protected. You're a named beneficiary. Nothing was taken from you. I looked at the document on the table. I did not pick it up. I want to ask you something first, I said. He waited. The power of attorney Danny brought last night, I said. The one bearing my name. It's dated 14 months ago. I want you to explain to me what that document is and where it came from. Something moved through his expression, not quite alarm, but its close neighbor. That's a valid instrument, he said. Prepared by my estate attorney. Prepared by your estate attorney, I said. Not mine. Prepared with your interests. Did I sign it? I asked. A silence. Danny executed. Dad. My voice was level. Did I sign that document? Did I sit before a notary in person and put my signature on a power of attorney giving my sister authority over my real property? He picked up his coffee. He took a deliberate sip. He set it down. The document is legally sufficient, he said. That is not the question I asked, I said. Presley. His voice shifted registers, lower, the warmth gone, something harder underneath. I have invested 30 years in building something for this family. 30 years of work in planning and thinking about the future while everyone else just lived in it. You have a beautiful home. You have equity. You have stability. Because of decisions I made and structures I built long before you understood what any of it meant. And I am asking you, as your father, to extend enough trust to let me explain what this structure is and why it was built. The notary who certified my alleged signature on that POA, I said. R. Vance Pruitt. His business address is in the same zip code as your office. Silence. The same notary, I said, also certified the transfer deed executed while I was in Sacramento. A deed bearing my name on a day when I was 400 miles away and can prove it. My father set down his coffee cup. The sound it made on the table was slightly too loud, not quite controlled. Beside him, my mother's hands tightened on her own cup. You're making an accusation, he said. I'm describing documents, I said. The accusation is implicit in the facts. What you're implying about Vance Pruitt. I'm noting that a notary with a business address adjacent to yours appears on 2 documents bearing my forged signature, I said. That's a fact. It will be part of the complaint I file with the Oregon Department of Justice. The word forged landed in the room and stayed there. My mother made a small sound, not quite a word, somewhere between an intake of breath and an attempt to speak that she didn't complete. My father's jaw had tightened. The broad, softened structure of his face had rearranged itself into something I recognized from specific moments in my childhood, the moments when someone had pushed past the edge of what his patience was designed to contain. You are not filing anything with the Department of Justice, he said, his voice dropping into the low, hard register, not shouting, something more controlled than shouting and in some ways more unpleasant. You are going to sit in this room and you are going to look at this document and you are going to understand that what was done here was done for your benefit and for this family's benefit, and then you are going to make a phone call and withdraw whatever case number you open with that lender, because what you are threatening to do will damage every person in this family including yourself, and I will not allow it. You will not allow it, I said. I am your father. You are the person who forged my signature on a county document, I said. Those are 2 different things. He stood up. Controlled, deliberate, the standing up of a man who has decided that physical height is the next available tool. He was 6 feet and had always been 6 feet, and he stood now at the end of the coffee table with his hands at his sides. I want you to hear me, he said. Because I am going to say this once, and I need you to understand that I mean it exactly the way it sounds. He paused. Everything that was done out of love for this family and for your protection, and I will not apologize for it. I looked up at him from where I was sitting. That house, he said, represents 34 years of everything your mother and I gave you. The schools. The summers. The thousand things we did and paid for and sacrificed for that you have never once acknowledged. And if you think I am going to stand here and let you treat an act of love as a crime because you are too ungrateful to understand what family means. Wade. My mother's voice from the sofa. Quiet, almost inaudible. He stopped. The room held the silence for 2 full seconds. Presley. He picked up the trust document from the coffee table and held it out toward me. His hand was steady. His voice, when it came, had been recomposed, pulled back from the edge, reassembled into something deliberate. Take the document. Read it tonight. And when you've read it, ask yourself whether this is really a fight you want to have. Because you will not win it. And you will lose a great deal more than a deed. I looked at the document in his outstretched hand. I need you both to leave, I said. He did not move immediately. He stood with the document extended for 1 second, too, then lowered it. He drew himself straight. And then, before he set it on the coffee table and put his hands back in his pockets, he said it, simply, with the flatness of a man stating something he has believed so long it no longer requires emphasis. That house belongs to this family. It always has. He set the trust document on the table. You're making a mistake, he said. I went to the kitchen and stood at the back window looking out at the creek. The light was going by 4:30 at this time of year, and the water was already in shadow, moving the way it always moved, steady, without drama, indifferent to the November cold and to whatever was happening in the house above it. My mother had not spoken since her single word during the confrontation, that quiet Wade from the sofa, barely above a breath. But she had been present for all of it, sitting with her coffee cup and her good coat, and I watched her now as she stood. The particular way she was not looking at me, the way she was looking at a point slightly to the left of the door, the way you look at something when you are making yourself not look at something else. Mom, I said. She stopped. Looked at me. The tight smile from the front walk was gone. What was underneath it was something I had seen before, infrequently, usually in the moments just after my father had left a room, a specific unguardedness, brief and quickly covered. I didn't know he was going to do this, she said. Her voice was quiet enough that my father, already at the door, might not have caught it. Okay, I said. He said, he told me it was agreed. That you'd both talked and you'd agreed. She was still holding the purse in both hands. Her fingers worked at the clasp, open and closed. I wouldn't have, Presley, I wouldn't have let him do it if I'd known you didn't. Loretta. My father's voice from the door. Not loud, but with a pull in it. She stopped. The fingers on the clasp stopped. I looked at her for a moment. There was more she had been about to say, I could see it, the sentence still in her face, and she had closed it off. Like a window pulled shut from inside. Come for dinner, she said finally, finding her way back to the familiar register. This week. We'll figure it out. She went to the door. My father let her out first. Then he stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, the warmth that had been on his face when he arrived entirely gone. I love you, Presley, he said. But you are not being reasonable. I know you believe that, I said. His jaw tightened. Then he went out and I closed the door behind him. I stood in the closed doorway for a moment. Then I went back inside to the desk and I picked up the trust document my father had left on the coffee table, and I carried it to the desk and opened it and read the first page, and the second, and halfway down the third page I stopped. The Kane Family Revocable Living Trust had 2 named trustees, Wade Kane and Danielle Kane. I was listed as a beneficiary. Not a co-trustee, the word my father had used on the phone, the concession he had dangled. A beneficiary. A passive recipient, subject to trustee discretion. I turned to the 4th page. Subsection 4, C. In the event that a beneficiary contested the trust or initiated legal action against a trustee, the contesting beneficiary's interest could be reduced or eliminated at trustee discretion. A no contest clause. I set the document flat on the desk. Outside, the creek was running the way it always ran, steady and indifferent. I sat with the sound of it for a moment before I reached for my phone and found the number I was looking for. A name I had added 2 years ago after a property law seminar at my firm, someone who had given a talk on title fraud that had been the most useful 40 minutes of the whole conference. I pressed call. She answered on the 3rd ring. This is Colleen Marsh, she said. Ms. Marsh, I said. My name is Presley Kane. I'm a land use planner in Portland. We met 2 years ago at the Pacific Northwest Land Title Seminar. I have a situation involving a fraudulent deed transfer, a forged power of attorney, and a no-contest clause in a trust instrument inserted into county records without my knowledge or consent. I need to talk to a real property attorney today." A brief pause. "I remember you," she said. "Tell me what you have." I opened the legal pad. "I have 2 documents with forged notarizations," I said. "A certified copy of the transfer deed, a mortgage servicer case number, 12 months of mortgage payment records establishing exclusive ownership, and conference documentation proving I was 400 miles away on the day the transfer was allegedly executed. Can you come in this afternoon?" "Yes," I said. 3 o'clock, she said. "Bring everything physical." "Understood," I said, and let it land like a period, not a comma. I recapped my pen and added 1 item to the bottom of the legal pad. Then I picked up my phone again, and saw that while I had been on the call with Marsh, a text had come in from my father. It read, "I love you, Presley. But that house belongs to this family. It always has. And if you make this ugly, you will be the one who made it ugly. Remember that." Colleen Marsh's office was on the 14th floor of a building in the Pearl District. Her suite had a waiting area with 4 chairs and a receptionist who offered me water and took my coat, and I sat for 6 minutes before a door opened and Colleen Marsh came out. She was in her mid-50s, with the kind of face that conveyed both precision and the willingness to deploy it. She had short gray hair and wore reading glasses on a chain and shook my hand with the directness of someone who does not perform warmth but does not withhold it either. "Come in," she said. Her office was organized the way offices are organized by people who process a high volume of paper. Everything in its place, surfaces clear except for what was currently being worked on, a credenza behind her desk with labeled binders in a row. She sat behind the desk and I sat across from it and she said, "Tell me from the beginning. Don't summarize." So I told her from the beginning. The Tuesday departure, the Friday text, the phone call in the rideshare, the certified copy from the recorder's office, Danny's visit, the POA document dated 14 months ago, the notary name that appeared on both instruments, the lender call, my father and mother arriving unannounced, the trust document with the no contest clause. The text message. While I talked, she made notes on a legal pad of her own, writing in compressed shorthand. She did not interrupt. She asked 3 clarifying questions: the exact date of the filing, the name of the notary, and whether I had any prior contact with the estate attorney my father had mentioned. I answered all 3. When I finished, she sat back and looked at what she had written. "The documents," she said. I reached into the outer pocket of my bag and pulled out the clear plastic sleeve. I slid it across the desk toward her. She opened the sleeve. She took out the certified transfer deed first, unfolding it slowly, holding it at a slight angle under the desk lamp. She read it top to bottom without commenting. Then she set it flat on the desk surface to her left and took out the power of attorney. She unfolded that one as well, and I watched her read it with the same thoroughness, the same silence. When she finished, she set the POA flat on the desk to the right of the transfer deed, so both documents lay side by side under the lamp. 14 months ago, she said, tapping the POA date with the cap of her pen. "Yes," I said. "And you were in Oregon 14 months ago. Not traveling." "I was here," I said. "I've been here. I can pull calendar records, work logs, anything you need." "We'll need them," she said. She picked up the POA again and looked at the notary acknowledgement. R. Vance Pruitt. "Same notary on both documents," I said. She set it back down. "Pruitt is a name I know," she said. "Not well, but I know it. He's affiliated with 2 or 3 small real estate transactional shops in the Beaverton-Hillsborough corridor. The kind that handle volume closings and don't ask many questions." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "That is not a conclusion. That is context." "Understood," I said. "What I can tell you as an initial read," she said, "is that if you were not present before this notary on the date stated in either of these acknowledgments, then both instruments are fraudulently notarized. Notary fraud in Oregon is a Class C felony. The underlying act, executing a deed transfer using a fraudulently notarized POA on behalf of a principal who did not grant authority, carries its own exposure under the Oregon Criminal Code as well as civil liability for the full value of the property." She paused. "The no contest clause in the trust instrument is unenforceable against you because you were never a voluntary party to the trust. You can't be bound by a clause in an agreement you didn't sign and were never shown. Something in my chest loosened by a small degree. Not relief, something more provisional than relief. The sensation of a structural calculation coming back correct. What do I do next? I asked. A few things simultaneously, she said. She tore the top sheet from her legal pad and paper clipped it to the front of the clear plastic sleeve. I'm going to retain these documents. We'll have both signatures forensically examined, the one on the transfer deed and the one on the POA, and compared against known exemplars of your genuine signature. The purchase documents for the property are ideal. I have the full purchase file, I said. I can bring it tomorrow. Good. She made a note. Second, I'm going to contact the Oregon State Bar's disciplinary office regarding the attorney who prepared these instruments. Do you have a name? Not yet, I said. But the trust instrument will have drafting attorney information in the signature block. I have a copy. I reached into my bag and produced the copy I had made of the trust document before leaving the house. I slid it across the desk. She turned to the last page. Read the signature block. Made a note. Third, she said, I'm going to file a complaint with the Multnomah County DA's office on your behalf. That complaint will include the notary fraud allegation, the unauthorized property transfer, and the forged POA. The evidence is unusually self-documenting. She looked at me. You have conference records proving you weren't in Portland on the transfer date. I have the hotel receipt, a dated conference badge, the business card with a handwritten time notation from a Thursday afternoon meeting, and the boarding pass showing a Friday departure, I said. That is a strong alibi for the transfer date, she said. The POA date will require the calendar records plus any corroborating witnesses or documentation. She paused. The text message your father sent. The one that says that house belongs to this family. I have the screenshot, I said. Forward it to me tonight, she said. That text in context is an admission of intent. He is not saying he made a mistake. He is asserting a claim he knows has no legal basis. That language is useful. I'll send it tonight, I said. She stood. I stood. She shook my hand again. Ms. Kane, she said. This is not a fast process. Courts move at their own pace. The forensic analysis takes time. Your father is almost certainly going to retain counsel once he understands the scope of what's coming, and that will slow things further. She held my gaze. But the documentation you walked in here with today is better than most of what I see in cases like this. You did not wait. You did not argue. You gathered. That was the right thing to do, I said. It was, she said. I picked up my bag and coat and walked to the elevator. I pressed the lobby button and stood watching the floor numbers descend, and I thought about my grandmother in her one-story house in Tigard, about the index funds and the paid-off mortgage and the Honda, about the note she had left in the will. For Presley, because she does the work and doesn't ask to be thanked for it. Magnolia had known. She had done what she could with a legally sound document and a single sentence to put something in my hands that was entirely, unambiguously mine. I stepped out into the Pearl District afternoon. It was 3:50 and the light was already going. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed the cold air, and then I took out my phone and forwarded the screenshot to Colleen Marsh. 2 weeks passed with the specific quality of weeks in which a great deal is happening and none of it is visible. Marsh filed the DA complaint. The purchase file went to her office by courier the morning after our first meeting. The forensic document examiner she retained, a woman named Dr. Eland who worked out of a Eugene firm that specialized in question documents, received both instruments and the exemplars and issued her preliminary findings within 4 days and her final report 2 days after that. 12 pages with labeled photographic overlays comparing both question signatures to 5 genuine exemplars from the purchase documents. I had signed my name 8 times across those closing documents 3 years ago, until the muscles in my right hand ached, and Dr. Eland had all 8 to work from. The conclusion section of her report used the phrase with a high degree of scientific certainty and the word spurious twice. I read it at the desk on a Sunday morning with coffee and the creek going outside, reading each page the way I had read the deed in the county recorder's office, without hurrying, without deciding in advance what I was going to see. Marsh sent me a copy with a cover email that contained one line, "This is what we need." I filed it in the folder alongside everything else. The folder was a new one, labeled with the current month and year, and it was growing. Behind the forensic report sat the certified transfer deed, the power of attorney, the mortgage servicer correspondence with the case number Marcus had given me, the screenshot of my father's text, and a printout of the Oregon Notary Public Database entry for R. Vance Pruitt, business address in Suite 440 of a Beaverton office building, the same zip code as my father's insurance office on Canyon Road. I had confirmed the addresses 3 days after our confrontation by looking up my father's business listing online. The two offices were in separate buildings 4 blocks apart. It was not the same building. It was the same neighborhood, in a commercial corridor where the businesses knew each other by proximity and by the particular web of referrals and returned favors that develops in any small professional community over 30 years. I noted that on the legal pad and did not draw a conclusion from it. I put it on the list and moved to the next item. On the 12th day, Marsh called again. "The search warrant's executed," she said. "I'm not at liberty to share what was found in Pruitt's office specifically. But the DA's investigator called me this morning and asked whether I had any additional client matters involving Pruitt, which is a question they ask when they've found enough to expand the scope." She paused. "The motion to void is ready to file. I want to file it today ahead of the hearing, so the court has the full record in hand before we walk in." "File it," I said. She filed it that afternoon. The motion included, as exhibits, the certified transfer deed, the power of attorney, Dr. Elan's final forensic report, the hotel receipt, the dated conference badge, the business card with the handwritten time notation, the boarding pass, 12 months of mortgage payment records, the original purchase documents, the mortgage servicer case number, and the DA complaint case number. Exhibit K was the screenshot of my father's text message. "That house belongs to this family. It always has." I had asked Marsh whether to include it. She had said, "It demonstrates consciousness of wrongful intent." Yes, we include it. So Exhibit K went into the record of Multnomah County Circuit Court, date stamped and case numbered, a text message my father had sent 4 minutes after driving away from my house in the dark green Buick. On the 18th day, something arrived in the mail. A standard business envelope, return address a law firm in Tigard, my name typed on the front. I opened it at the kitchen counter and unfolded the single page inside, a letter on law firm letterhead, brief, signed by an attorney I didn't know. It read, in the careful language of legal correspondence, that the firm represented Wade and Loretta Kane and that their clients were prepared to execute a deed of reconveyance returning the property at Cartwright Lane to my name in exchange for a dismissal of all pending complaints and a release of all claims. I read it twice. Then I photographed it and texted the photo to Marsh, "Received this today." She called back in 11 minutes. "It means they know what the forensic report says," she said. "It's a settlement offer dressed in reconveyance language. Inadequate, a reconveyance and dismissal gets you the house back but doesn't address the fraudulent notarizations or the criminal exposure. I'd want full indemnification against the lender's due on sale claim, legal fee reimbursement, and a formal acknowledgement of the fraudulent instruments." "And if they won't agree to those terms?" I said. "Then we go to the hearing," she said. "We go to the hearing," I said. Marsh sent the counteroffer. Their attorney responded in 2 days. They would agree to the reconveyance and fee reimbursement, but not to formal acknowledgement of the fraudulent instruments. We went to the hearing. On the 17th day, a day before the settlement letter arrived, though I didn't know that yet, Marsh had called with one more piece of information. "The DA's office wants to meet with you," she said. "They've been running their own inquiry in parallel and they've found something." "What did they find?" I asked. "Your property is not the first," she said. "Pruitt's commission records show notarizations on 3 other property transfer instruments over the past 4 years, all involving properties where the named grantor later reported not having executed the transfer. 2 complaints were filed but not pursued. A 3rd is still open." She paused. "Yours would be the 4th. And by far the best documented. The DA's office is treating this as a pattern rather than an isolated incident." I set down my coffee. 3 other properties," I said. "They want to meet with you in person," she said. "With your originals." The meeting was in an office downtown, an assistant district attorney named Gerald Fitch, methodical and thorough, and an investigator from the financial crimes unit named Reyes, who said almost nothing but wrote constantly in a notebook with a mechanical pencil. I brought the originals in the clear plastic sleeve, the purchase file, the mortgage statements, the conference documentation, and the screenshot. Marsh sat beside me. I answered every question Fitch asked directly and completely. Toward the end of the meeting, Fitch said, "Ms. Kane, we intend to execute search warrants on the offices of Pruitt and the drafting attorney simultaneously within the next 10 days. Depending on what we find, we may also seek a warrant for your father's business office. Before we do that, we're going to attempt to interview your father. Voluntarily first. If he declines, we'll proceed to subpoena." He paused. It's possible that before any of that happens, he becomes aware that this investigation is broader than a family dispute. We can't predict how he'll respond. "He'll call me," I said. Fitch looked at me. "He has a pattern," I said, "of returning to the same language when a situation is escalating past his control. He'll reach out and say what he always says." "Which is?" Fitch asked. "That everything he did was done for the family," I said. "And that the house belongs to this family. It always has." Fitch wrote it down. I went home from that meeting and sat at the desk and looked at the creek through the back window. Running faster than its normal November pace after 3 days of rain, the surface broken and catching what light remained. I was still at the desk when my phone rang at 4:47. "My father." I answered. "Presley." His voice was not the warm version. It was not the flat professional version. It was something I had not heard before, lower than his usual range, and underneath it something compressed, a sound produced under pressure. "I know you've spoken to an attorney," he said. "Yes," I said. "I know there are people asking questions." A pause. "I need you to understand something. I need you to hear me say it." Another pause, longer. "Everything that was done out of love for this family. Everything. And that house belongs to this family. It always has. Whatever you think you're doing right now, I am asking you to stop. As your father. I am asking you to stop before this goes somewhere none of us can come back from." His voice at the end of that sentence had something in it I had not heard in 34 years of knowing it. Not the performing patient's voice, not the warning register, not the professional flatness. Something that lived underneath all of those. I did not answer immediately. I smoothed the legal pad in front of me with one hand. "I'm going to let you go, Dad," I said. "Presley." "Good night," I said. I ended the call. I wrote the date and time at the top of a fresh page. Below it, exit statement number 2, phone call, "Everything that was done out of love for this family. Everything. And that house belongs to this family. It always has." I underlined it once. Then I picked up the phone and called Marsh. "He called," I said when she answered. He repeated the language. Verbatim. "Did he say anything new?" she asked. "He asked me to stop," I said. "Before this goes somewhere none of us can come back from." "I'll note it in the file," she said. "Ann Presley, the quiet title hearing has been scheduled. 3 weeks out. Multnomah County Circuit Court. I want you in that courtroom." "I'll be there," I said. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, a working room, fluorescent lit, mostly empty on a Tuesday morning. Marsh sat beside me at the petitioner's table. Across the center aisle sat my father's second attorney, not the estate lawyer, and beside him in a dark jacket my father. He had not looked at me when he came in. He sat with his hands folded and his posture straight and his face in the professional arrangement, present, composed, giving nothing away. My mother was not there. Danny was not there. The judge entered and the clerk called the matter. Marsh presented the case in the compressed language of court procedure. The motion to void the transfer deed, the grounds, the supporting documentation, the forensic report, the alibi evidence, the relevant Oregon statutes. She spoke for 11 minutes. The respondent's attorney made a brief argument about the validity of the power of attorney, which the judge allowed him to complete. Then the judge asked 2 questions, one about the forensic report's methodology and one about the date discrepancy in the POA, and Marsh answered both. The judge looked at the file for approximately 90 seconds. Then she said, "The motion is granted. The deed of transfer is void ab initio, void from the beginning. The property is restored to the petitioner's name. The county recorder will issue a corrected record within 10 business days." She looked over her glasses. "The forensic evidence is referred to the district attorney's office, which is already in receipt of a complaint. That referral is judicial notice only." She closed the file and looked up. And that was the moment, not a dramatic moment, not the kind that announces itself, when my father understood that the Circuit Court of Multnomah County had just looked at 2 years of his planning and 9 months of execution and a notary in the same zip code as his insurance office and 4 documents bearing my name without my presence, and had taken 45 minutes on a Tuesday morning to make all of it as though it had never happened. I did not look at him when the gavel came down. I looked at Marsh, who gathered her papers with a small, deliberate efficiency, and I looked at the judge's bench, and I looked at my own hands resting flat on the table. Marsh leaned toward me. "It's done," she said quietly. Then I looked at my father. He was still sitting with his hands folded. He had not moved during the ruling. But his face, when I looked at it, had done something that all the professional composure and the deliberate posture could not entirely contain. It had gone the particular flat gray of a man who has just watched a structure he spent 2 years building unmade in under an hour. His attorney said something to him in a low voice. He did not appear to hear it. He was looking at me. I held his gaze for a moment. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Then I looked away. Marsh touched my arm briefly. We stood, gathered our things, and I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway, bright, ordinary, smelling of the building's central heating, and kept walking toward the elevator without looking back. He set the trust document on the table. "You're making a mistake," he said. I went to the kitchen and stood at the back window looking out at the creek. The light was going by 4:30 at this time of year, and the water was already in shadow, moving the way it always moved, steady, without drama, indifferent to the November cold and to whatever was happening in the house above it. My mother had not spoken since her single word during the confrontation, that quiet wade from the sofa, barely above a breath. But she had been present for all of it, sitting with her coffee cup and her good coat, and I watched her now as she stood. The particular way she was not looking at me, the way she was looking at a point slightly to the left of the door, the way you look at something when you are making yourself not look at something else. "Mom," I said. She stopped. Looked at me. The tight smile from the front walk was gone. What was underneath it was something I had seen before, infrequently, usually in the moments just after my father had left a room, a specific unguardedness, brief and quickly covered. "I didn't know he was going to do this," she said. Her voice was quiet enough that my father, already at the door, might not have caught it. "Okay," I said. He said, "He told me it was agreed. That you'd both talked and you'd agreed." She was still holding the purse in both hands. Her fingers worked at the clasp, open and closed. "I wouldn't have, Presley. I wouldn't have let him do it if I'd known you didn't." "Loretta." My father's voice from the door. Not loud, but with a pull in it. She stopped. The fingers on the clasp stopped. I looked at her for a moment. There was more she had been about to say, I could see it, the sentence still in her face, and she had closed it off. Like a window pulled shut from inside. "Come for dinner," she said finally, finding her way back to the familiar register. "This week. We'll figure it out." She went to the door. My father let her out first. Then he stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, the warmth that had been on his face when he arrived entirely gone. "I love you, Presley," he said. "But you are not being reasonable." "I know you believe that," I said. His jaw tightened. Then he went out and I closed the door behind him. I stood in the closed doorway for a moment. Then I went back inside to the desk and I picked up the trust document my father had left on the coffee table, and I carried it to the desk and opened it and read the first page, and the second, and halfway down the third page I stopped. The Kane Family Revocable Living Trust had 2 named trustees, Wade Kane and Danielle Kane. I was listed as a beneficiary. Not a co-trustee, the word my father had used on the phone, the concession he had dangled. A beneficiary. A passive recipient, subject to trustee discretion. I turned to the 4th page. Subsection 4, C. In the event that a beneficiary contested the trust or initiated legal action against a trustee, the contesting beneficiary's interest could be reduced or eliminated at trustee discretion. A no-contest clause. I set the document flat on the desk. Outside, the creek was running the way it always ran, steady and indifferent. I sat with the sound of it for a moment before I reached for my phone and found the number I was looking for. A name I had added 2 years ago after a property law seminar at my firm, someone who had given a talk on title fraud that had been the most useful 40 minutes of the whole conference. I pressed call. She answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Colleen Marsh," she said. "Ms. Marsh," I said. "My name is Presley Kane. I'm a land use planner in Portland." We met 2 years ago at the Pacific Northwest Land Title Seminar. I have a situation involving a fraudulent deed transfer, a forged power of attorney, and a no-contest clause in a trust instrument inserted into county records without my knowledge or consent. I need to talk to a real property attorney today. A brief pause. I remember you, she said. Tell me what you have. I opened the legal pad. I have 2 documents with forged notarizations, I said. A certified copy of the transfer deed, a mortgage servicer case number, 12 months of mortgage payment records establishing exclusive ownership, and conference documentation proving I was 400 miles away on the day the transfer was allegedly executed. Can you come in this afternoon? Yes, I said. 3 o'clock, she said. Bring everything physical. Understood, I said, and let it land like a period, not a comma. I recapped my pen and added 1 item to the bottom of the legal pad. Then I picked up my phone again, and saw that while I had been on the call with Marsh, a text had come in from my father. It read, I love you, Presley. But that house belongs to this family. It always has. And if you make this ugly, you will be the one who made it ugly. Remember that. Colleen Marsh's office was on the 14th floor of a building in the Pearl District. Her suite had a waiting area with 4 chairs and a receptionist who offered me water and took my coat, and I sat for 6 minutes before a door opened and Colleen Marsh came out. She was in her mid-50s, with the kind of face that conveyed both precision and the willingness to deploy it. She had short gray hair and wore reading glasses on a chain and shook my hand with the directness of someone who does not perform warmth but does not withhold it either. Come in, she said. Her office was organized the way offices are organized by people who process a high volume of paper. Everything in its place, surfaces clear except for what was currently being worked on, a credenza behind her desk with labeled binders in a row. She sat behind the desk and I sat across from it and she said, Tell me from the beginning. Don't summarize. So I told her from the beginning. The Tuesday departure, the Friday text, the phone call in the rideshare, the certified copy from the recorder's office, Danny's visit, the POA document dated 14 months ago, the notary name that appeared on both instruments, the lender call, my father and mother arriving unannounced, the trust document with the no contest clause. He set the trust document on the table. You're making a mistake, he said. I went to the kitchen and stood at the back window looking out at the creek. The light was going by 4:30 at this time of year, and the water was already in shadow, moving the way it always moved, steady, without drama, indifferent to the November cold and to whatever was happening in the house above it. My mother had not spoken since her single word during the confrontation, that quiet wade from the sofa, barely above a breath. But she had been present for all of it, sitting with her coffee cup and her good coat, and I watched her now as she stood. The particular way she was not looking at me, the way she was looking at a point slightly to the left of the door, the way you look at something when you are making yourself not look at something else. Mom, I said. She stopped. Looked at me. The tight smile from the front walk was gone. What was underneath it was something I had seen before, infrequently, usually in the moments just after my father had left a room, a specific unguardedness, brief and quickly covered. I didn't know he was going to do this, she said. Her voice was quiet enough that my father, already at the door, might not have caught it. Okay, I said. He said, he told me it was agreed. That you'd both talked and you'd agreed. She was still holding the purse in both hands. Her fingers worked at the clasp, open and closed. I wouldn't have, Presley, I wouldn't have let him do it if I'd known you didn't. Loretta. My father's voice from the door. Not loud, but with a pull in it. She stopped. The fingers on the clasp stopped. I looked at her for a moment. There was more she had been about to say, I could see it, the sentence still in her face, and she had closed it off. Like a window pulled shut from inside. Come for dinner, she said finally, finding her way back to the familiar register. This week. We'll figure it out. She went to the door. My father let her out first. Then he stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, the warmth that had been on his face when he arrived entirely gone. I love you, Presley, he said. But you are not being reasonable. I know you believe that, I said. His jaw tightened. Then he went out and I closed the door behind him. I stood in the closed doorway for a moment. Then I went back inside to the desk and I picked up the trust document my father had left on the coffee table, and I carried it to the desk and opened it and read the first page, and the second, and halfway down the third page I stopped. The Kane Family Revocable Living Trust had two named trustees, Wade Kane and Danielle Kane. I was listed as a beneficiary. Not a co-trustee, the word my father had used on the phone, the concession he had dangled. A beneficiary. A passive recipient, subject to trustee discretion. I turned to the fourth page. Subsection 4, C. In the event that a beneficiary contested the trust or initiated legal action against a trustee, the contesting beneficiary's interest could be reduced or eliminated at trustee discretion. A no-contest clause. I set the document flat on the desk. Outside, the creek was running the way it always ran, steady and indifferent. I sat with the sound of it for a moment before I reached for my phone and found the number I was looking for. A name I had added 2 years ago after a property law seminar at my firm, someone who had given a talk on title fraud that had been the most useful 40 minutes of the whole conference. I pressed call. She answered on the third ring. "This is Colleen Marsh," she said. "Ms. Marsh," I said. "My name is Presley Kane. I'm a land use planner in Portland. We met 2 years ago at the Pacific Northwest Land Title Seminar. I have a situation involving a fraudulent deed transfer, a forged power of attorney, and a no-contest clause in a trust instrument inserted into county records without my knowledge or consent. I need to talk to a real property attorney today." A brief pause. "I remember you," she said. "Tell me what you have." I opened the legal pad. "I have 2 documents with forged notarizations," I said. "A certified copy of the transfer deed, a mortgage servicer case number, 12 months of mortgage payment records establishing exclusive ownership, and conference documentation proving I was 400 miles away on the day the transfer was allegedly executed. Can you come in this afternoon?" "Yes," I said. 3 o'clock, she said. "Bring everything physical." "Understood," I said, and let it land like a period, not a comma. I recapped my pen and added 1 item to the bottom of the legal pad. Then I picked up my phone again, and saw that while I had been on the call with Marsh, a text had come in from my father. It read, "I love you, Presley. But that house belongs to this family. It always has. And if you make this ugly, you will be the one who made it ugly. Remember that." Colleen Marsh's office was on the 14th floor of a building in the Pearl District. Her suite had a waiting area with 4 chairs and a receptionist who offered me water and took my coat, and I sat for 6 minutes before a door opened and Colleen Marsh came out. She was in her mid-50s, with the kind of face that conveyed both precision and the willingness to deploy it. She had short gray hair and wore reading glasses on a chain and shook my hand with the directness of someone who does not perform warmth but does not withhold it either. "Come in," she said. Her office was organized the way offices are organized by people who process a high volume of paper. Everything in its place, surfaces clear except for what was currently being worked on, a credenza behind her desk with labeled binders in a row. She sat behind the desk and I sat across from it and she said, "Tell me from the beginning. Don't summarize." So I told her from the beginning. The Tuesday departure, the Friday text, the phone call in the rideshare, the certified copy from the recorder's office, Danny's visit, the POA document dated 14 months ago, the notary name that appeared on both instruments, the lender call, my father and mother arriving unannounced, the trust document with the no contest clause. We drank our coffee. We talked about small things, her new part-time work at a design studio in the Pearl District, a novel she was reading that she'd recommend to me if I wanted, the fact that it had rained for 11 straight days and the creek behind my house had been running at its highest November level in 3 years. She asked if the porch boards had held up. I said they had. I paid for the coffee. She let me. We stood on the sidewalk outside and hugged briefly, the kind of hug that acknowledges the gap without pretending it isn't there, and she walked to her car and I walked to mine. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. The November rain had started again, soft and indecisive, the kind that can't commit to being real rain. I watched it touch the windshield and thought about the 12-year-old girl who had talked to me in the dark after lights out, about the distance that opens between people who start in the same place and move at different speeds toward different understandings of what the same family means. We were not fixed. I had meant that. I had also meant that I was here, and that here was something I hadn't been certain of 3 weeks ago. I started the car and drove home. My mother called on a Saturday, 10 days after the hearing. I was in the backyard when the phone rang, standing near the creek with a cup of coffee, watching the water level, still high from the November rain, running clear now over the rocks along the near bank. I looked at the screen. I stood there for a moment with the creek going past and the gray sky above the fur line and the phone in my hand, and then I answered. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Presley." Her voice was careful in a way that was different from her usual carefulness. The usual careful was social, the first Sunday of the month careful, the topics arranged, the register maintained. This was something else. Something that had had 10 days to sit with itself and had not resolved into anything comfortable. "I want to say something," she said. "And I don't want you to respond right away. I just want to say it." "Okay," I said. "I knew something was happening," she said. "I didn't know what exactly." He was working on something for months and he told me pieces of it but not all of it. He said it was estate planning. He said it was for the family. She stopped. I heard her breathe. "I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. I knew you hadn't been consulted the way he said you'd been consulted. I think I knew that. And I didn't ask. Because asking would have meant a certain kind of conversation with your father that I have not," another stop. "That I have not had in a long time." I stood by the creek and I did not fill the silence. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," she said. "I'm not asking you anything. I just wanted you to know that I knew something was wrong and I chose the easier thing, and that was not right. And I'm sorry." The creek moved past. A heron landed at the far bank, gray and still, folding itself into the landscape with the precision of something that has been doing this for a very long time. "Thank you for saying that, Mom," I said. Another silence. Shorter. "Are you taking care of yourself?" she asked, and her voice had shifted, not back to the Sunday call register exactly, but toward something more ordinary, the way voices shift when the hardest thing has been said and what comes next is just the continuation of being alive. "I am," I said. "Are you?" A pause. "I'm figuring it out," she said. Which, for Loretta, was the most honest answer I had heard from her in a long time. We talked for 11 minutes. Not about the legal case, not about my father's criminal exposure, not about Danny or the POA or the notary or the trust document. We talked about her sister's hip replacement, which had gone well. About the fact that she had started going to a Thursday morning garden club at the community center, which she liked more than she'd expected to. About the chicken recipe she'd mentioned in the text during the conference, which she emailed to me the following day. We did not resolve anything. We were not fixed. But we were talking, and talking was not nothing. I thought about my father in the weeks that followed, not constantly, not with the obsessive quality of unresolved anger, but the way you think about a structure you have studied carefully and now understand. The insurance business he had built over 30 years. The way he spoke about money as though it were weather, forces beyond anyone's control, requiring management, requiring someone with the expertise to navigate them. The way he had walked through my house on Cartwright Lane 4 years ago, hands in his pockets, and told me the creek was a flood insurance liability rather than the thing it actually was, which was one of the reasons I had chosen the house in the first place. He had looked at my life the way he looked at all assets, as something that should be optimized, structured, leveraged. The idea that a thing could be valuable precisely because it was mine, not the family's, not a resource, not equity to be deployed, was a category he did not have a name for. He had decided, somewhere in those 2 months of planning, that what he was doing was building something better out of what I had. He probably believed it. That was the part that was hardest to hold alongside everything else, not the deception, which was identifiable and documentable, but the belief underneath it, which was not. The belief and the deception were not separate things. That was what I had learned. They were the same thing, seen from different angles. I did not forgive him in the weeks I am describing. I did not know yet whether I would. What I did was something smaller and more specific. I stopped carrying the weight of his version of the story. The version where the house was a family resource, where I was ungrateful, where what he had done was an act of love misunderstood by an inflexible daughter. I set that version down the way you set down something you have been carrying so long you stopped noticing you were carrying it. The house on Cartwright Lane was mine. The corrected deed said so. The work said so. The 4 years of saving and the 11 days of water damage and the gutter Saturday and the 36 mortgage payments said so. My grandmother had said so in the only language the law recognizes. That was enough. For now, that was enough. There was one more thing. 2 months after the hearing, Marsh forwarded me a letter from the DA's office. It informed me, in the formal language of prosecutorial correspondence, that charges had been filed. Wade Kane and R. Vance Pruitt jointly, 2 counts of first-degree forgery, 1 count of unauthorized practice involving real property, and 1 count of notary fraud. The estate attorney was named in a separate related filing. The letter noted that the investigation had identified a total of 4 properties across the Beaverton-Portland corridor transferred through similar mechanisms over a 4-year period, and that the charges encompassed conduct related to all 4. I read the letter twice. I folded it carefully along its crease. I put it in the folder in the filing cabinet. Then I went to the back window and looked at the creek. It was January by then, and the water was running at its winter level, higher than November, clear and fast, catching the flat gray light and moving it along downstream without keeping any of it. The heron was back at the far bank, or a heron was, gray and still and folded into the landscape, present without demanding attention. I stood at the window for a while. Then I went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the table by the back door with the door cracked an inch because I liked the sound of the creek better without glass between me and it, and I drank the coffee slowly and thought about nothing in particular, which was a thing I had not been able to do for 2.5 months. The heron stayed at the far bank for most of that hour. I watched it until it lifted, the slow, enormous unfurling of gray wings, the way it cleared the fur line with one long pull of its wingspan and was gone, and then I washed my cup and put it in the rack and went back to work. There are 3 things I want you to carry from this story if you carry anything. 1. Your name on a document matters. Check it. Know what it says, where it's filed, and who has access to it. The people who want what you built will move on paper before they move anywhere else. 2. The most dangerous sentence in certain families is not an accusation or a threat but a reframe. This is a family resource. This is a restructure. This was done for your protection. A reframe asks you to accept a premise before you've had a chance to examine it, and once you've accepted the premise, the conclusion has already been decided. Don't accept the premise. 3. The work you did is yours. The hours, the savings, the roof you replaced and the gutters you cleared and the mortgage you paid every month without missing one, that is not a family resource. That is a life you built. It belongs to you in the way that things earned and tended and loved belong to a person. Don't let anyone tell you the grammar of that sentence is negotiable. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If this reminded you of your own family, the quiet ones who do the work, the assets that get called ours when they were always yours, the document you almost didn't know to check, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And subscribe for the next one.